Welcome to episode 263 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we get to speak to retired agent Craig Arnold, who served in the FBI for 22 years. In this episode, Craig reviews two shooting incidents he was involved in, one which resulted in the saving of the life of an FBI informant, and another where, during a fatal shootout, he saved the life of a cooperating witness by taking the life of a subject. Craig received training to become a certified peer support counselor and traveled all around the country to speak with and offer support to other FBI agents and police officers involved in shooting incidents. As the recipient of the FBI's Medal of Valor and 2 FBI Shields of Bravery, Craig is one of the most highly decorated agents in the history of the Bureau and was a member of the FBI's Honorary Medal Selection Panel. Initially assigned to the Jackson Division, Greenville Resident Agency, a 2-man RA in Mississippi, where he worked criminal matters, he was shortly thereafter transferred to the New York Division, where he worked on a drug task force with the NYPD. After he received his Office of Preference transfer to the Kansas City field office, he again worked on a gang task force for about 2 years, and then moved to a violent crime fugitive task force working with officers from the Kansas City Police Department for 8 years until his retirement. During his career, he was a SWAT team operator and SWAT team leader in Kansas City and New York. Now, before we get to the interview, I want to remind you that during July, I will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of Women Agents by releasing 3 special episodes featuring stories from both retired and active agents about the history of and what it's like to be a female FBI agent. I'll also be displaying the unique show-level artwork I had designed to highlight this significant milestone in the FBI's history. In July, please check out my reader team email for more information about the upcoming episodes. I want to welcome new listeners. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there are links to where you can join my reader team to keep up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies, buy me a coffee, and visit my website to learn more about me and my nonfiction and crime fiction books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. I want to welcome my guest, Craig Arnold. Hey, Craig, how are you?
Good morning, Jerry. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. One of the things that always occurs when any agent, I know it's the case for me, when you go out to speak to a group of kids or young people, one of the first questions that we get is, have you ever been shot, and have you ever shot anyone? And for most of us, we are very, very fortunate because we can answer no. But in your case, that's not how you would answer that question.
Yeah, it has come to me on several occasions, and I usually answer it by saying, well, I've been shot at and missed, and I had to shoot someone to save a life. Most of the kids or adults that ask that question don't really understand the ramifications if you have been shot at or have taken a life. I try to answer it honestly, and you're quite right, Jerry. Most law enforcement officers never have to use their weapon, thank God. But I seem to have the affinity to be in a situation where those things happen.
I read your bio just before we started and let everyone know that you are one of the FBI's most decorated agents. That's because your life has been on the line on several times. That's what we're going to talk about today, those experiences that you went through. But we're also going to talk about how the FBI recognizes those sacrifices through their Medal of Honor program which you, of course, are very knowledgeable about. Where should we start when it comes to your own experience? What would you like to tell us first?
The first situation I was involved in and got exposed to a shooting situation was I was on the drug task force at the Brooklyn Queens RA back in 1990, and I had the pleasure of serving with a number of outstanding agents, including Jack Garcia, who I know you've had on before, one of the bravest, most unbelievable undercover agents I've ever had the pleasure to work with. Diego Rodriguez was in Squad C-13, drug task force of the NYPD. He ultimately became ADIC New York. A lot of wonderful agents, most of whom climbed the ladder a lot higher than I did. I stayed as a street agent, but we had a wonderful squad, and we had an amazing bunch of NYPD detectives working with us. On December 19th of 1990, I was returning from the United States Attorney's Office, Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, and I had a wiretap, Title III, a wiretap, and I had to go provide all the information from the overhears we had and to justify the wiretap for continuing. Most people don't understand the vast amounts of probable cause you have to get a wiretap for Title III. And it doesn't matter if they're Colombian illegals or not. The same Fourth Amendment protections apply. I was in there trying to get all the probable cause together so the judge would allow our wiretap Title III to be renewed for another month on a group we were investigating. As a matter of fact, on that squad, C-13, the drug task force, we were on NYPD working Colombian cocaine. We had at least one or two wiretaps up at all times, and also at least one or two Group 1 undercovers involved, which is, undercover agent with certain funding and reporting requirements, of which Jack Garcia was actively involved with the undercover operations. We always had wiretaps and undercover operations going on that squad. We were very busy, and that night, even more so. I was returning from the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, came back to the squad, and we were at a commercial building on Queens Boulevard, the Brooklyn Queens RA, and the drug task force had our own floor, and came back to the squad area, and everything was in turmoil. And I said, well, what's going on? They said, well, we have a situation. DEA had a cooperating witness kidnapped. There's two brothers that were working for the DEA. One of them was kidnapped, apparently regarding a misunderstanding about some missing cocaine without payment. Apparently, the cooperating witnesses were engaging on some business on their own, not being monitored by the DEA. So we had a kidnapping in progress. In New York City at that time in 1990, the bank robbery task force, comprising of agents and NYPD, as our task force was, they would normally handle any of those kidnapping cases. Well, it just so happened that that evening, the bank robbery task force was enjoying their Christmas party because it was December 19th. Getting closer to Christmas. Our ASAC asked us to handle it. So we had DE agents with us out at the task force, and we had the brother of the kidnapped victim with us also. So it had already been a long day for me getting my Title III renewed, but some of the agents had already left for home, and most of the cops were already off duty because of the ongoing overtime issues that they couldn't come out with us unless overtime was compensated for. And at that point, they had used all the overtime that the Bureau provided for that month. The NYPD was reluctant to authorize some more overtime usage and ended up with several of our agents and several of the DEA people to respond to this situation. The night progressed along with the brother engaging in conversation with the kidnappers and trying to arrange a resolution. They requested money. I forget how much they wanted. So we arrived at a suitable negotiating point with money, and we developed a plan. And they initially wanted to meet us down on Queens Boulevard, a little bit closer to the city. I had a couple of DE agents in my car, which was not the perfect solution if you're going into harm's way with people you haven't worked with before. We set up on the meet location down on Queens Boulevard, waited, and now it's really late in the evening with nothing happening. Most of us figured it would be one of these things that never transpired. They'd never show up, and this would just go away and it would continue on, or they just release them or ultimately kill them as they promised to do. That meeting never took place. We went back to the office and waited for the phone call. They called back and gave us an excuse why they didn't show up. So then we agreed to meet them in Midtown Manhattan on the Upper East Side. The plan was the brother would have a vehicle and he would appear at this location. I think it might have been 2nd Avenue. And he would stand outside the vehicle. When the bad guys showed up, he would pop the trunk and they would take the money. And then they would take him to the location where his brother was being held. So once again, we went into Midtown Manhattan. We set up. We had a pretty good perimeter set up. And I had DEA agents with me also. We had other combined cars with DEA and FBI. And we were set up there. We had Louis Scalero with us, who ended up being an ADIC in New York. He was either an ASAC or the coordinating supervisor for drug squads at that point. I can't remember, but Louis was out with us and my supervisor, Leo Farrell. And so we set up. Well, we thought this wasn't going to go. Then all of a sudden, a vehicle approached. The cooperating witness's brother had got out of the car and he had popped the trunk. Popping the trunk to show the money was also a signal to us that the deal was going down and we were to converge and try to take this guy into custody.
Was there any sign of the brother that had been abducted? Were you going to try to take this down without having him right there with you, being able to rescue him?
The ideal solution, as they worked it out, would have been to have the brother there and exchange the money for the brother. But as I recall, we get the money, then you follow me to get your brother, you can have your brother back. As we talked about a plan, we figured at this point, there was someone with a brother at an unknown location. We probably needed to grab this guy and then go from there. Well, what happened was we converged on this subject, took him into custody, but there was someone else there, another guy involved with the kidnapping, who saw what happened. And he was only about a block from us, and he was tucked into a parking spot in a dark area. So when he saw what happened, he took off at a really high speed. We chased him through Midtown Manhattan. At that point, probably 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. So we had a car chase in Midtown Manhattan. We ultimately lost him. The guy we had in custody said, yeah, the plan was we were going to take the money and we may or may not have taken you back to the location, depending on what the guy who got away told me. So things were unraveling. The guy we had in custody told us that he's going back to this home in Queens and they're going to kill the source's brother. So at that point, we jumped in our vehicles and headed out to this location. Now, the lead car that had the brother and the subject we arrested, the subject we arrested was giving directions as we went. He couldn't provide an address, unfortunately, to pre-position some people there. All he could do is say, I'll tell you where we're going. So we had kind of a conga line heading out over the bridge to Queens. Ultimately, we ended up at a location not that far from our office on Queens Boulevard.
What made you feel that you could trust him, that he was going to lead you to the right location?
That's a good question, Jerry. And at that point, I wasn't in the vehicle with the guy, but we had one of our Spanish speakers dealing with him, and he felt that the guy knew he was in trouble and he was going to be somewhat honest with us to show us the location. Because I think he knew he was in trouble with a kidnapping charge, and I don't think he wanted to add a murder charge to it. So the Spanish speaker kind of felt that I believe this guy is going to tell us or show us where the home is, where they're keeping the kidnapped victim. And he was being sat on by at least one or more other subjects. And the subjects we lost was heading back at a high rate of speed to go ahead and get the guy and take him out of that place to some place to execute him. And the guy we had in custody said they're probably going to take him someplace else and then execute him because the plan had unraveled. So they're trying to keep the rest of us cars up to date on where we're going and what's going on with the subject in custody. We got some pretty good feelings that we're going to go to the right spot, but what we were going to find there, we didn't know. The subject in the car said there's one guy at the house. We found that out. And then the subject we lost in the chase would show up at the house. So we'd have two subjects at the house and the kidnapped victim. So off we went on this merry chase out to Queens. He was long gone, but we were going at a pretty high rate of speed and the traffic wasn't too bad at 1 a.m. about heading out on the LIE. So we exited. We had a meeting point and the subject said the house is just down the street, about 2 blocks away.
How many people were with you at the time? How many vehicles?
As I recall, Jerry, we must have had about 6 vehicles and numerous agents in each vehicle. Unfortunately, as I alluded to earlier, NYPD brothers were with us because of an overtime issue. And my partner in the NYPD was very upset about that, but there's nothing he could have done. We had several vehicles with DEA and FBI together. And we had the vehicle with the source, the cooperating witness, and the subject we had in custody. So we pulled up at this neighborhood in Queens. We decided we needed to get eyes on that house immediately. So my supervisor, Leo Farrell, and his primary relief, Steve Dickey, volunteered. They went down and got an eye on the house. The rest of us were trying to put into a swift plan of what to do on how to hit the house, or in the alternative, if they get out, how we try to stop them from getting away with the kidnapped victim. At that point, we were talking about a hasty plan, and with Louis Scalera there with us, before we even had a chance to put our vests on, we got a call on the radio from Steve Dickey saying, there's movement at the house. And we have 2 people coming out with the kidnapped source. We jumped on our vehicles and headed down there at that high rate of speed, not knowing where it was. We had a general idea from the subject in custody. We took off. I was the second vehicle in line. And as we're heading down there, we heard shots being fired. One of the guys, I think Leo, had a shotgun. Steve had an MP5. So as we're sliding around the corner, coming up on the house, shots were being fired. The first vehicle in front of me kind of slid through the intersection, and I slammed on my brakes. I had a DEA agent in the front seat with me, one in the rear seat, and I slammed on my brakes trying to stop this vehicle from getting away from us. Well, the vehicle slammed into me, spun me around to the side, and just pushed us out of the plan. As an aside, I just got this car new for me. The Bureau had bought some vehicles from one of the rental car agencies, and to me, it was a brand new vehicle, which is a big deal. I didn't have a whole lot of time on the job. A new vehicle was something special. Here goes the bad guy slamming into my vehicle. In that vehicle was one subject. The kidnapped victim, they left him on the steps of the house. And this guy jumped in the car to get away. So this guy jumped in the car to get away, slammed into my car, spun us around. The kidnapped victim stayed hunkered down on the steps of the house. Steve Dickey at that point jumped on the hood of my car, firing over the roof of my car at the fleeing vehicle, which is going in reverse at a high rate of speed down this street. Steve is on my hood, firing with a firing position on the hood of my car, firing at this fleeing subject that had just engaged in a gunfight with them. At the same point, the kidnapped victim was still laying down in front of the house, and the other subject started running down the street in the opposite direction of where the subject had gone. I bailed out of my car and drew my weapon and was drawing a bead on this guy who was running down the street as he was firing his weapon at us and another DEA vehicle, which is approaching from down the street. So he threw a couple at us and also at the vehicle coming down the street. As I brought my weapon up to sight in on him, I realized behind him, if I missed, were several homes. If I missed, one of my rounds would have gone into a family dwelling there in Queens. I held my fire, and at that time, I heard a loud noise of a DEA agent's vehicle. Actually, it was a task force officer driving, gunned his vehicle, came down the street, and hit the subject and ran over him. If it was you or I, Jerry, we'd have been long dead after being hit by this vehicle at a high rate of speed. But it just kind of laid his back open, causing some internal injuries, but he ended up being fine. Fortunately, when the car hit him, he lost his handgun. He was taken into custody. Agents then went to grab the kidnapped victim. He was fine. Now we had 2 in custody. The next issue was the guy who had got away with the car down the street, going down this particular street at a high rate of speed in reverse. I started my car up, and with the 2 agents with me, we hauled butt down the street chasing after this vehicle that just went down the street. And then another vehicle or 2 came with us. Went down the street, quiet residential neighborhood in Queens. Well, it was quiet till then. And we saw the getaway car parked in the tightest group that Steve put in the windshield of this vehicle. Very, very tight group. Must have been 10 or 12 rounds. It just must have missed the subject's head by inches. This tight group probably got some broken glass in his eye, but the vehicle was empty, still running. At that point, we said, now might be a good time to put our vests on before we start clearing neighborhoods and backyards. Threw our vests on real quick and went through the closest backyard. Owner came out of the house, told him to stay inside. Long story short, we searched several yards without result. At that point, we had an NYPD helicopter up in the sky, and we had NYPD on the scene. It would have been nicer to have our task force officers with us with the NYPD, because probably the most concerned we were of the night was when a couple of NYPD radio cars came around the corner, tires screeching, and there we were with guns and everything, but we had our ray jackets. We raised our hands, and they figured we were good guys. And then we had the NYPD helicopter up with a bright light searching for the sky.
I was going to ask you to explain that a little bit more for people listening, about the fact when you're engaged in an incident like that, where you don't know each other and the identification of other law enforcement is not there. There's real danger of friendly fire.
Exactly right, Jerry. Very severe danger of blue on blue, as we say. The cops coming in basically just heard shots fired. They're coming in, and we hadn't had a chance to liaison with them because we didn't have any comms with them. They had responded to a shots fired call. They came around the corner, and we had our lights activated, emergency lights, made no threatening gestures to the responding officers. At that time, they were able to control a helicopter that was in the vicinity also. That's a real concern. A blue on blue possibility, and they're coming in a shots fired call. That could have been bad. We worked great with DEA that night, but if you don't train with them and know them, you don't have that feeling of the warm and fuzzies that you can take any challenge and deal with it if you had your partners there and other members of your task force.
Talk about that a little bit. The difference is with the task force members, you do know each other.
Absolutely. We train with them. We're on the street with them every day. I was blessed to have two NYPD partners, both of them with over 25 years of the job. And they had taught me a lot about the streets of New York City and how to be a better agent and a law enforcement officer in their city. Not having them with me and not having a lot of other agents on the squad with me felt a little bit naked. Quite honestly, Jerry, in the situations I've been in, especially in another situation I'll talk about later when I took a life to save a life, you can do the most amazing things in the world knowing your partner is with you. Individually and by ourselves, many law enforcement officers, including myself, perhaps would not have been able to react in a positive manner if you did not have your partners with you or your SWAT team members with you.
Your backup.
Absolutely. Going through a door with your partner, you're not really worried about what's behind the door because you know your partner's behind you. And if you go down, he'll take care of business and he will make sure your six is covered. So it gives you an incredible confidence to be able to go into harm's way and deal with the wolves behind the door because you have those people with you. If they're not with you, it takes that element of comfort and confidence. Not that you don't trust these other agents, but you don't have that comfort zone with you that, hey, I know D's behind me and he'll handle whatever. He's got my back and we could do anything together. So not having that with us made this particular shooting situation a little more uncomfortable. The alternative, if you have your partner with you or your team members with you or your task force members with you, the confidence you have that everything's going to be all right is incredible. That was probably one of the more disarming situations, not to have that comfort level with my partners and other agents from the task force that normally would have been with us. Thank God it worked out okay, and none of us were hit by those rounds. And the guy that got away didn't ambush us in the dark down there. All in all, ended up being a successful night with the kidnapped victim being rescued.
Were you able to locate the guy that got away that night or after?
Yeah, what happened, Jerry, is the guy we had in custody said, okay, he's probably going to go to his house and he's probably going to go leave. That's probably where they're going to take the guy to kill him. Now he's going to go there and grab his money or whatever he had there and then leave that area. I was a member of the Brooklyn Queens SWAT team. It's New York City. There's 3 teams. I was a member of the Brooklyn Queens SWAT team. This particular residence was in Queens. We activated the team, got them together, and the next morning we hit the house. Having been involved in that shooting, Louis Shalero said, Craig, I'm sorry you're not going through the door with your SWAT brothers there because you just involved this situation. And I didn't like it, but I understood his position exactly. The team hit this guy's house the next morning early, and he had already departed. As an aside, eventually we heard back from sources in Colombia that this guy fled the country, made it back to Colombia, but the information was that his bosses were very unhappy with him in Colombia. And I think as the word went then, he met an unfortunate demise because of his failure. He was out of the situation permanently. The guy, the DEA task force officer, hit. He walked with a limp, I guess, for the rest of his life. He was hit pretty hard in the spine. As I said, Jerry, you and I have been long dead, but he survived. He had a prison term, and the guy who cooperated with us went to prison for reduced time. All in all, what could have been a very tragic situation in many ways worked out well. We got the victim, and no good guys were harmed.
This brother was kidnapped. Is that something that occurs often? I do hear about it occasionally, even now. Could you talk about that? I don't even know what you call it, but why gangs kidnap and abduct other gang members?
Absolutely. And that's a good question, Jerry, because it helps us understand some people's action. Because if I'm dealing dope and I steal dope or money from my boss, naturally they want to take it on me. But if I'm not available and I'm a pretty smart bad guy, I'm pretty careful about not being observed or tracked, what they will do is grab a relative, a wife, a child, a family member, and hold that against me. So I would give up the money and pay the money that I stole or give back the dope that I stole. It's very common in the dope business and gang business, as you alluded to, is that, okay, well, you're not available. We're going to take it out on a family member.
How many times and how many situations are those family members who are abducted, tortured, or actually killed?
I'm not sure exactly how many times it happens, but I know that sometimes they can't pay back the dope or money, and they do kill the family member, brother, sister, wife, child. It does happen. And it happens so often that we don't even know about it. All we know is so-and-so was murdered. Come to find out, it was murdered because a family member that broke bad, and they took it on a family member of his or her. A lot of times law enforcement doesn't know how it happened, but they have a homicide they can't explain. I think it happens more often than you realize because the truth doesn't really come out on what happens like this. But what many times happens, we're working the Colombians, we take them into custody and they would not cooperate. They would say, make your best case on me, I'll go to jail, because their family members back in Colombia would be killed if they cooperated. So the Colombians had a pretty good hammer on people working for them in the U.S. by not cooperating, because if they did, they had family in Colombia, and they were told, if you cooperate, we're going to take it out on your family. As far as a business standpoint, it's probably pretty wise of them to do that. And unfortunately, I think it happened more often than not that would happen. And it's the reason why we had a tough time getting subjects to cooperate, even though they wanted to, but their family being back in Colombia really left them no option if they cared about those family members. There was some conversation after the fact, Jerry, that, oh my, we just all put our lives on the line to get back a cooperating witness, a drug dealer, which he was, and that's why he was in that situation. I guess he's short of these people, and that's why they kidnapped him for money. But the irony was not lost on us that we'd all just risked our lives for essentially a drug dealer, but he was cooperating with the DEA. And what we do, Jerry, as you well know, sometimes we have to put our lives on the line for all sorts of people, including cooperating witnesses.
And I was even thinking about the fact that even if you knew it was another bad guy and you had heard that there was going to be an assassination of a bad guy that wasn't cooperating, the FBI would act on that information also, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, Jerry. You know, we're not judgmental on who they are. A life is at stake, and we will risk our lives to save the life of another. We may comment on the irony of going in harm's way to save someone that maybe not totally on the right side of the law, but the FBI and law enforcement in general goes to great lengths to save the lives and protect those people who are willing to cooperate with us. We do that essentially because it's the right thing to do. We save lives. Secondarily, if it ever got out that we didn't, future cooperation probably would be reduced, that we didn't stand up for the people who helped us. It was the right thing to do, but as we talked about it over a beer a couple of days later, we said, oh my, well, it worked out okay. Shots fired, weren't hit, but it's what we do. It's what we have to do. And it ended up being ultimately a successful night.
I guess I want to touch on the fact that while it was all going down, you probably didn't think about any of that.
Not at all. We knew we had a job to do. Our mission was to secure the release of this DEA cooperating witness or informant, whatever to use for him. I assume he's a cooperating witness. That was our mission. And we never thought anything about it. We're going to do what we have to do to secure his release. And if we have to go in harm's way to make it a happy ending, to save his life, that's what we do. That's what we're sworn to do. We're not in a position to judge whether or not that life is worth saving. Whatever the life is, we're going to try to save to the best of our ability. And the other things can be sorted out later on. So no, that never occurred to us. As we're going into the kill zone there with the shooting, as we're sliding across and getting hit by the vehicle and didn't even have our vests on at that point, it did occur to me, like, what have we got ourselves into at this point? In for a penny, in for a pound. Things moved pretty quickly. Fortunately, nothing happened about it. I will mention that at that point, the New York office tried to get us together to talk about the critical incident. Most of us said, no, we're good. It's okay. And that was a mistake on my part and the rest of us involved with it, because after I got involved with the critical incident program after my second shooting, I realized it's essential that you take advantage of the programs offered by the FBI, and we should have talked to some people about it.
Should that offer have been voluntary, or do you think that it should have been something that the Bureau and I guess the DEA folks made participants in a shooting talk about the incident to make sure that mentally everyone's okay?
It's a good question, Jerry. After the fatal shooting I was involved with, I'll get to later, and I was in the program, I always recommended to the SACs that they use their best influence to make them show up. And it's hard to coerce people, but the boss can, I think, have an influence. And also, if they know if a peer is going to be there, like myself, they're more willing to show up. At that point, it was my memory that the peer support and the critical incident program was more in its infancy, and they didn't really pressure us to do it. I guess looking back, I would have wished that they wouldn't have pressured us to do it. But unfortunately, Jerry, whether we're male or female, we're all law enforcement officers, and we like to think that we're tough and it's no big deal. But it was, especially for me, because I had some issues that I did not fire my weapon, even though I knew that it would have been unsafe to, because if I missed, I would have hit a residential building, a home, and maybe injured or killed someone there. But it would have helped me to talk about that, the decision I made, which is the right decision. But you have some regrets. Maybe I should have shot. And fortunately, the DEA task force officer took care of business and ran the guy down without having to have other rounds fired in a residential neighborhood. As I say, when Steve Dickey jumped on the hood of my car and was shooting the length of a street, which went up as the car was going down, it's hard to describe, but there was no homes behind the vehicle for a long way. So there were no issues with his rounds hitting homes. The street went on forever, and any rounds, the velocity was substantially reduced by hitting the glass, and a lot of it went through the back glass of the car.
Which is proven by, as you said, the tight group of bullet holes that you found in that vehicle when it was abandoned.
Yeah, it was amazing, Jerry. The tight group, a little bit to the right, perhaps, and he wouldn't have got away.
Did we ever get a date on when this occurred?
It was December 19th, 1990, and then it was ultimately resolved, I guess, in the early morning hours of December 20th of 1990 when the team hit the guy's house and he was gone. Funny story about that. The next morning, I called my wife from the office, Judy Lewis, now Judy Lewis Arnold. She's an FBI agent also, and she was at 26 Federal Plaza working on a white-collar squad. The next morning, I called and said, hey, I sorry I didn't call you sooner. I've been involved in a shooting. We're going to go hit the house of the guy that got away. I'll get back with you later, but it's all right. Everyone's fine. No big worries. That cost me a lot, Jerry, with presents and flowers and everything, because you know, typical knucklehead guy. I figured, hey, I'm okay. Everyone's okay. No big deal. She'd heard about the shooting in the office, didn't know we were involved with it. I said, look, we're okay. We're going to go out now and try to catch the guy that got away, but I'm okay. It's all good. Not very well handled by myself at all, Jerry.
Especially in the situation where, as an agent, she knows the real deal. She knows the danger and the situations that you had been put in. That kind of makes it worse when it comes to the worry factor.
It does, Jerry. And I was a knucklehead, guilty as charged. Unfortunately, as a lot of guys, I didn't learn from that experience too well about keeping my wife informed, because January 30th, 1997, out in the Kansas City division, I was involved with another shooting situation, and I didn't keep her too well informed on that one either. I'm guilty as charged on the second occasion.
And for you being involved in this shootout and saving the brother of the source, I understand that you and the other members of the team were awarded the FBI Shield of Bravery.
That's correct, Jerry. We think there were 4 of us or so that got the Shield of Bravery for that incident. It should be noted that our supervisor, Leo Farrell, the office was putting people in for some medals. They were going to make some higher than others. And Leo said, we all get the same one that were active in the situation. Those of us who drove into the shooting like that received the FBI Shield of Bravery. It was presented to us at the New York office. The director was in town and it was awarded that. It's not something you ever think of. You just do the right thing and you go into harm's way with your fellow agents and you do the right thing. It's not something you ever think of.
What does it feel to receive an award like that? Who was the director at the time? What did it feel like to receive acknowledgement of the fact that you put your life on the line?
Oh my, it's going back. It's 1990, Director Sessions. He was in New York and he presented the awards to us at a medal ceremony the New York office provided. And Jerry, it was very, very humbling. Most of us were kind of shying away from the attention because FBI agents every day do many brave things. And to be singled out like that, I understand why. It was a good result, but it was very humbling. Director Sessions did a very nice job in handing them out and making us feel special. But I think all of us were a little embarrassed by the attention. We did go across the street to Stark's and have a couple adult beverages after that. Just happy that it worked out that way and none of us were hurt and we got the source back alive. It was very humbling. I guess looking back, I think it's a good message to send to the agent population and the citizens we're sworn to protect, that the FBI would recognize those agents who, in their estimation, have done something above and beyond. I think it's a good thing. The medals program is a very good thing, and I think it's good for the people to see and also for the agents.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we actually talk about the medals program and your participation in making those important decisions on who gets a medal. But let's go on to the next shooting incident that you were involved in.
Fast forward, 1996, my wife Judy and I took a transfer from New York to Kansas City. I'm from back east, Rhode Island. My wife used to be a cop out here, Leawood PD. She's from out in Kansas City. Drinking martinis one night in New York City, she said, what's it going to take for you to OP, i.e. request a transfer to Kansas City with me? Because agent couples obviously have to have the same office down where they'd like a transfer to. I told her, I want a new Harley, Chiefs tickets, Royals tickets. She said, done. Being a good attorney, I wrote it down on the bar napkin. We both signed it, and the rest is history. And we took the transferred out here in 1996. About a year later, I was working on the gang task force then before going to the fugitive task force. And a couple of white collar guys came to me and said, look, we got a situation where we're working a case on this guy in a white collar case, insurance for this and that. And our cooperating witness is in with this guy's son, and the son wants to buy some dope. We're thinking about running a deal like a reverse, which means that we would purport to sell dope to bad people, a reverse undercover. And we want to snatch this guy up because he's involved with the dope business too. He's also involved with the insurance fraud. So we want to purport to sell some cocaine to this guy and lock him up. But we're not involved with dope business and the tactical side of the house. So would you run that for us? So naturally we said we would. Our supervisor said, Craig and a couple other guys can help you out with a takedown. So long story short, we had it set up to sell this defendant, Joe Riley, 3 kilos of cocaine. We got 3 kilos of cocaine out of the drug evidence locker, and we ended up in a Motel 6 up by the airport, north of the city. The subject came out. We had it all set up. We had Kansas City, Missouri Police Department TAC team outside. We had surveillance teams on site to follow people. The subject came out, saw the cocaine. We were ready then in a neighboring room in case something went down when he came out to see it. We had an arrest team. We had rehearsed over and over on the entry in case he did something at this particular juncture. He wanted to see the dope. We had people outside, people inside. I was the first man through the door. My partner was a Kansas City, Kansas Police Department officer, and he was following me in, followed by the source, cooperating witnesses handler, and another individual. We had the room wired for sound. There was a clock radio in there that had a camera in it. We were prepared at this juncture, but he came in, saw the dope, and went away. When he went away, the surveillance went with him and followed him around, made several stops. We didn't know what transpired. In the interim, he was gone for several hours. My partner and myself and the other two guys followed us through the door, rehearsed over and over, getting through the door because the tech guy had rigged something with the security device. You flip over a hook and that prevents entry from a neighboring room. The Bureau had taken care of that, so it would pop off when I pushed through the door. But the subject would look up and see that it looked to be a secure door. So we'd done a lot of preparation. The clock radio was wired up so we could do the takedown and have it available for evidence at a subsequent trial. So we had rehearsed and rehearsed. I had to rehearse, open the door myself because there wasn't enough room for my partner to open the door for me. Fortunately, we had rehearsed well. Finally, surveillance said he's coming back and he's in a vehicle with two other people. So at that point, we decided, Jerry, that if he comes up by himself, we'll let him come into the room, and we're in the adjoining room on the second floor of the Motel 6. We'll let him in. We feel confident we can handle it. If more than one person comes up, we decided we're going to take it down outside and not give them access to the room with our cooperating witness and the dope in there because it would look like it's going to be a ripoff, which means they're going to come in, hurt the cooperating witness, and just take the dope and not do anything, rip us off. So we had that planned down. Came up by himself, we'll let him in. We'll do what we got to do once money changed hands because we had a video on computer. We could see exactly what's going on in the room next door. I could not see it because I was stacked at the door, but the case agent, the tech guys were there. They could see exactly what's going on. And once money changed hands and the dope was brought out to hand over dope to the bad guy, money to us, at that point, we made entry and take him into custody. Surveillance brings them out, did a nice job following them. We had Kansas City, Missouri Police Department TAC team outside. Everything was all set up. The subject got out of the vehicle, had a plastic bag in his hand, which we figured the money was in there. His name was Joe Riley. I figured he's got the money in there. We let him come up the stairs, come inside. And in the video, which you can see quite clearly, and I think you've seen it, Jerry, the bad guy, Joe Riley, comes into the room. Our cooperating witness shuts the door, turns around to face the subject. The subject reaches into the bag and takes out a revolver and shoots our cooperating witness. At the last moment, the cooperating witness put his hand out and the shot hit him in the chest. He was kind of perpendicular. It traveled across his chest, went through a tattoo on his shoulder, across his chest, and out the chest or the shoulder, I forget, through another tattoo. Went down, wounded, but not seriously. As he went down, he's waving his arms and legs. He's calling out the video for Dan, the agent that had this source, cooperating witness. The guys in the room were observing this. I did not have a video next to me, which is one of the things we decided would be important next time, but there really wasn't room for me to see it. I know our guy didn't have a gun, and when I heard the shot was fired, I knew something bad happened. My partner and I initiated our entry, opened the door, pushed it open. I drew my Sig Sauer P220 45 caliber in a shoulder rig. As I'm coming through the door, pushing it open, I'm reaching for my weapon and drawing it. And right in front of me, who do I see is the subject. He had just let another round go, which fortunately missed the cooperating witness. And then he hears me coming through the door. And in slow motion, I see him turning toward me with his weapon to engage me. I'm thinking to myself, you better be quick about this or something bad's going to happen to you and the source. Fortunately, I was able to draw my weapon quickly. I shot him 4 times with a 45 caliber weapon. He went down on my feet. As we say, he was dead right there. With the first round, I understand the autopsy said the first round blew out his heart and the other 3 went into the chest, and he was dead right there. And in the video, chaos erupts. The cooperating witness is yelling, I've been hit, I've been hit. I said, I know, Joe, go lay down, go lay down. My partner is getting this guy cuffed, which is our procedure. We don't know if he's dead or not. Kicked the weapon aside, cuffed him up. Outside, the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department TAC team did a great job. They pulled the guys out of the Lincoln Continental out there, put them both into custody. It was determined that the cooperating witness was wounded, but not badly. Called medics for him and everything, and that was it. From the bad guy's first round, when he let it go, to my last round, I believe, and the video will show it, I believe it was like 6 seconds between his first round and my last round of 4. 6 seconds.
Wow.
Happens very quickly. As a matter of fact, with my conversation with the inspectors who came out for the shooting investigation, I told them, I said, well, I know the Bureau policy is to announce before shooting, but it happened too quickly. I didn't. Well, quite clear in the video, I yelled freeze, FBI, and then shot. But that goes to show you that your memory is somewhat cloudy in a shooting situation.
So you didn't even remember doing that?
I don't remember announcing at all, Jerry, no. I apologize to the inspectors that I didn't, because I hadn't seen the video then. Those of us involved in the shooting didn't watch the video for probably a couple of weeks because it was a little bit too fresh to see. But the aftermath, I got to say that the Bureau's policy is so spot on. If police officers are involved in a shooting, they have to give a statement, and they're interviewed right away in most departments right after the shooting. The Bureau's policy, which I assume is still in effect, is we don't talk to locals. Our supervisor came as we were going, so they said, Craig, you and Jose, you're going to have to go to the office. And I said, okay, that's good. The supervisor, of course, the Bureau policy came and said, Craig, I need your weapon, and I understand that. He said, here, take mine. The Bureau policy is a supervisor to say, I need to take your weapon because it's evidence now, but they don't want to make you feel like you've done something wrong. So they're supposed to offer you another weapon. This supervisor did a great job. Tom Price says, Craig, I need your weapon. I said, I know you do, Tom. Here it is. I locked it open, took the mag out, gave it to him. And he said, here, take mine. I said, no, I got my ankle gun. I got another 45 back in the office. So I'm good, but I appreciate you're doing that. Bureau policy.
Yeah, I really like that because taking away someone's weapon when they're in their most vulnerable state, when they're probably feeling a little paranoia because they've just been involved in a shooting incident, could have been killed, and then to leave them, as you said, naked, stripped of a way to defend themselves is a mind trick. I'll use the word mind trick, but you know what I mean.
You're absolutely right. Jerry, you're absolutely right. You feel naked because I just been in a shooting. It could happen again. I need a weapon. And the other thing of that is taking it away is like making you feel guilty, like you've done something wrong also. Both those factors, the Bureau policy was so spot on. Okay, I didn't do anything wrong. Here, take my weapon. You're all good. And I fortunately on the job, I always carried it back up and I had another weapon at the office. But they wanted to get me to the office because they didn't want me left on the scene because I wasn't going to speak with the locals. The local that showed up, ended up being good friends with. He said, I showed up and I got no one to talk to. But the Bureau said, look, we'll let you talk to him, but not right away, because the Bureau had done research knowing that your recollection and your memory right then is distorted. And to give a statement then would be not in your best interest or the Bureau's best interest because your mind is in such that you just been through a traumatic event. So the Bureau told him, said, you can talk to him after our inspectors do. But we will give you a copy of his signed sworn statement. If you've seen his signed sworn statement and if still you want to talk to him, you can, but not until then.
Talk a little bit about the investigations that occur after an FBI agent has been involved in a shooting, especially one where someone has been killed. So for the locals, this is a homicide investigation. And then for the Bureau,
For the Bureau, it's a shooting incident that has to be investigated. Whether there's shots fired, whether there's a fatality or not, immediately the Bureau contacts the shooting team and they were dispatched. They were there, I think the day after the shooting, they arrived late in the afternoon or so, but within 2 days, this whole inspection team was out there. They go through everything, Jerry, as I'm sure you're aware. The Bureau is so complete about that. They go through everything, the arrest plan, all the planning, rehearsal, And then I was interviewed by two agents. The good news is, from my situation, Jerry, they were able to view the video. So they could see the video, they could see what happened. And then they interviewed me. I must admit, a couple of days later, I had a better hold on a sequence of events and what actually happened, much more so than right after the event. A traumatic event like that, you say, holy moly, what happened? Some of your feelings are distorted. As I told the inspector, I should have said, identified myself and, freeze or whatever, but I didn't. And I obviously had. The Bureau does a good job. You're not interviewed the day or the day after. It's like 2 days after. I gave my statement, which took quite a while. Then it was typed up, and I went over it with my wife, fortunately, another agent. I went over it, changed a few things because it's my statement, and I'm going to be held responsible for that. Made a couple of minor changes, and that was it. Signed sworn statement. They gave it to the local PD because of the homicide investigation. And they said, no, it was complete. We don't need to talk to Craig. And it was all good. As I alluded to earlier, the reason why I was able to go through that door quickly and not worry about what was going to happen is my partner was behind me. Kansas City, Kansas Police Department officer was Aviera. He was right behind me. So I had no second thoughts about what I was getting into. Good, bad, or indifferent, I'm going through the door and saving that source's life if possible. And if I go down, my partner will take care of business. Or if something happens, I know he'll take care of business for me. Unlike the first situation, this situation, we had rehearsed together. We're partners. It was all good. Went back to the office. I talked to a peer support individual who had been trained in peer support. They had been in a shooting situation. Talked to the SAC. It was funny. The peer support guy, very, very good guy. He said, in our experience, you really should not have any alcohol tonight or whatever. And I said, I really appreciate your input, but when I go home, I'm having a cocktail because this has been a long day. But I was very grateful that the source was fine. No law enforcement officer, as you know, Jerry, ever wants to take a life, ever. And they portray it on TV in such a matter-of-fact manner, it bothers me because no one wants to take a life. But we all have to be ready to do so to save the life of another. I was grateful that with my training and experience, I was able to do that, to save a life. I was sorry to have to take a life, but he had shot our source and he got what he got. After this, there was a local trial, the felony murder trial. Two guys in the car. One guy cooperated, the other guy didn't. The guy who didn't was charged with felony murder in state court because, as you know, if a murder is committed and someone else assists in that regard, but was not the shooter, he could be charged with murder also. These two guys are in the car outside. One of them wasn't charged with it because he cooperated. The other guy was charged with a murder charge because he was part of the conspiracy to commit the murder because he was helping his buddy with this crime. In state court, Court TV broadcast it live. The video was shown in court. Our faces were somewhat covered over, but the video at that point was in the public domain after it was shown in state court. So within a couple of days, it was on Fox's Wireless Police videos, and that was out. And that was somewhat traumatic testifying in court with that.
You have shared the link. I have seen that absolutely unbelievable video of the source being shot and of you shooting the subject. Is it still something that you hesitate to look at? Does it still traumatize you?
Jerry, that's an excellent question because this is something I think goes through all these people's minds that have a similar situation on video. I didn't want to watch it for the first couple of weeks. I took 2 weeks off. The Bureau was great about that. They said, take as much time off as you want. We took 2 weeks off. And after we came back as a group, we sat down and watched the video. It was very traumatic. The video is very disturbing. So much violence so quickly. As a matter of fact, this video was used in new agents training. The firearms training unit, I don't know if they still do it. They used to show this video to new agents in one of their first couple of firearms training at the FBI Academy for New Agents to show them what could happen as an FBI agent. And as a matter of fact, some people, after seeing videos like that, or my video and some other things, they've decided that maybe this job's not for them. It's a good video, I think, for the agents to see that you may have to do this at some time. We watched it together, and you could have heard a pin drop in the room after, Jerry, because it affected us all, the result of the video and the taking of a life there. The night after the shooting, that night, I had a couple of good scotches, but I couldn't sleep because even though I hadn't seen that video, I was seeing that video in my head, and I couldn't turn it off. I didn't sleep too well for several nights. We had a team come in, a critical incident team with a mental health professional, a peer, and a chaplain. They helped me out because they said, that's totally usual. You can't stop that video. But eventually, as time goes on, you'll be able to turn that off. And that's very true. Not immediately, but down the line.
How long did it take?
It took probably at least a month or so, as I recall, to be able to have some control over the remote, so to speak, of my personal video going off on my mind. And then after I saw the video, it took me a while to be able to control that remote to turn it off on my mind. But when I watch it now, Jerry, it definitely my blood pressure and my heart rate goes up, and it still gets to me somewhat, but I can turn it off and realize I did what I had to do. We've had to move on. So now I can control that video, but for a while.
The one in your head.
Yes, the one on my head, I can control that. I don't mind seeing the video now. Some people have asked me to see it, and I've showed it to them, and it's okay, because I know now I can shut that video off in my head.
Is it okay if I put the link to the video with the show notes for this episode for those who want to look at it to see it?
Absolutely. I have no problem with that at all. It certainly encapsulates what happened. I think that link also has an interview with Albanese, the guy who went to jail. He didn't cooperate. I have no problem with that at all. I'm good with it. I must admit, though, a couple of weeks after the shooting, my wife and I were upstairs. I'm channel surfing. It came on Fox's Wild Police videos, and it showed up, and it was a little disturbing to me. A side note, my wife knew we were out on this operation, 6 o'clock or so when the shooting went down. And her bureau car, we have that voice private radio, voice privacy. Her vehicle had dropped the code, so to speak, so she couldn't use the radio for voice privacy. She couldn't hear what was going on, so she's going home. She would have heard the radio traffic about the shooting, but she didn't hear it because her radio needed to be recoded. I'm getting ready to head to the office. She calls me and said, so, hey, is that thing ever going to go down or what? On the phone, I said, yeah, babe, it went down. I had to take a life to save a life. I'm going to the office. I'll see you at home a little bit later.
You do not learn your lesson, do you?
I don't, Jerry. Guilty as charged. I just don't learn my lesson. She said, I'm coming to the office. I said, no, baby, it's all good. Look, I got to be in, I got to talk, whatever, and I'll drive home. She said, absolutely not. You're not driving home. I'm getting my brother-in-law to bring me into the office, and then we'll drive your bureau car home. I'll be there shortly. So once again, women are much smarter than we are and know the right thing to do. Guilty as charged a second time.
For your involvement in that shooting incident, you were awarded the FBI Medal of Valor. How did that feel? I mean, you've already received the FBI Shield of Bravery. Now you're getting the FBI's highest award, the Medal of Valor.
It's hard even to put into words, Jerry, the honor that the Bureau shows you. The other thing, Jerry, it's given to you in a shadow box. The citation is etched on one side, and the other side, on a felt background, is the actual medal itself. And the Medal of Valor would go around your neck. It's on a ribbon. It's got your name on the back, says Medal of Valor. It's hard for even me to articulate the feelings that one gets with that award. Humbled. It's humbled because I believe that the vast majority of agents would have performed exactly the way I would have had been in that situation. I take it as not making me better than anybody else. It's just a recognition of the fact that I did in those circumstances, because all the guys I work with, the SWAT team, drug task force, gang task force, fugitive task force, any of them could have done the same thing, as well or better. But as one of my friends said to me, he says, yeah, but you did it. That may be true, but it's humbling. The special agent in charge of the Kansas City office had a very nice ceremony. Out of a tragedy of taking a life, something very positive came out of that, because the Bureau got me involved with the critical incident team, peer support program. A few months after that, they sent me to training over a weekend down in Charleston, South Carolina, and I got certified as a peer support person, and I was made available to be going out on shootings with a critical support team, with a mental professional chaplain and a peer support person. I went out all over the country until I retired, going out and doing debriefings and trying to help other cops and agents that have been in my shoes, help them out as they helped me out. It was a blessing for me to give back, to be able to do that, knowing what they're going through after a shooting like that. To me, that was one of the many, many blessings to be able to give back. The other thing that was very positive for me out of a situation like that and going through the trials and everything after that, I got a call from FBI headquarters and they wanted me to be on the FBI Medals program, the panel they have, which was also such an honor. I can't even articulate to you and your listeners what an honor it was for me to sit on that panel. I understand the composition and the way they do it may have changed since I retired at the end of 2005. When I was on the panel, they had two agents who had received the Medal of Valor, and their thought was then, if the agents are on the board and haven't received the highest award, they may be more reluctant to hand it out. So they had two agents that have received the highest award, the Medal of Valor, and they had two SAC special agent charges running field offices in the field, two bosses from the field to sit on it also. And then the tiebreaker would be the deputy director, head of the personnel division. At that point, she would cast the vote if we were tied 2-2. I'm grateful from the Bureau that they recognize actions like that. I think it's very important, just like the military has their medals program. I think it's very important for people that go into harm's way to be recognized, because conversely, you can be criticized if by your activities on the job. It's nice to have something very positive for them to show. And I think it's very good for the age of population, for the agency itself. I think it speaks volumes about the agency and how they do it. It's a beautiful award, and they pay homage. They have a suitable presentation. Also, I was part of the FBI Brooklyn Queens SWAT team that made an entry way back in the early 90s of the bomb factory. These people are going to blow up. After the first bombing that went off in the trade centers in New York, after that went off, these same people were plotting to blow up the FBI office, the UN, and the Holland Tunnel. Long story short, there's a source involved, and the Brooklyn Queens SWAT team made the entry as these guys were mixing up the 50-gallon drums with fuel oil and fertilizer. And we made the entry, took them into custody. For that, our team received a group award, FBI Shield of Bravery. I was humbled to receive that for the rest of my teammates for taking that down. I've seen the medals program at work. I'm humbled by being the reception of one Shield of Bravery team award, one Shield of Bravery personal award, and the Medal of Valor personal award. I like to think it's what anyone else would have done in my position. I have the utmost respect for all FBI, and I was humbled to be part of the program that voted on whether to give medals out or not. And that's an extremely difficult thing to do when you're quote unquote passing judgment on if they should receive award and what level as it is. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that no awards are given that aren't appropriate, and they should be given the highest priority that's in accordance with the directive. I met some wonderful people. As a matter of fact, I was honored to replace Ed Morales on the medals board. And I must say, Jerry, I felt totally inadequate to replace that man on the medals board. After what he did, I said to myself, well, you shouldn't be on this board. Look at the guy you're replacing, what he did. I felt totally inadequate to replace Ed, true FBI hero, and I was very humbled to replace him on the board. I was on it for several years. They would fly us down there several times a year when they had enough pending recommendations for awards. And then we'd meet. We'd fly in the night before. I'd meet with the other agent on the board, have dinner, review the packages, because you're given a package to brief. SACs were given a package to brief, the agents were. So we had a package, at least one to brief for every meeting. It was a very, very good way the Bureau did things. They didn't just say we're giving it out. They had two agents from the field and two SACs from the field making decisions at that point. It may have changed by now, Jerry, but I was very humbled to be part of that program, the medals program, and also the critical incident program. The Bureau's done a great job with. Very proud to be part of both those things. So you get involved with a situation, it's kind of tragic, but there's always, it seems to be something positive. There's always a silver lining that awaits us. That was my experience with that.
I have been fortunate enough to have interviewed on FBI Retired Case File Review other recipients of the Medal of Valor, including Ed Morales, who received his for his bravery during the Miami shootout. I've also interviewed Rich Macco, who I understand was also on the board. Rich was in Philadelphia and was involved in a shootout and was shot I have an episode also with him about the Broad Street shootout in Philadelphia that he was involved in. And I have interviewed, it hasn't been posted yet, it will be posted at the end of July, John Kufta, who was shot and returned fire during the 1994 shooting at the Washington Memorial Police Headquarters. Telling their stories is very, very important to me. I certainly appreciate you sharing your experiences with us today.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah, in fact, Rich Macko, I sent the boy Rich, great guy. We still correspond to this day.
He's a good guy.
Great guy. Yeah.
I will list those episodes in the show notes of your episode. So if anyone wants to hear their stories, the Bureau's Honorary Medals program started in 1989, and there are 5 medals. Did you sit and make decisions about all 5 medals?
Yes, the Star, Agents Getting Wounded Line of Duty, Meritorious Achievement, Shield of Bravery, Medal of Valor, and the Memorial Star. Those are the 5. It's been a while.
What I'll do is post a list, a little summary of those medals that you've just mentioned and why they're given out to the different agents, to civilians, and the surviving family members of FBI agents. I'll get that off of the FBI website and include the list in the show notes for this episode so people can get a full understanding of how the Bureau recognizes agents involved in feats of bravery. We've been talking about the medals that you received from the FBI, but also during your career, you've received the Director's Award for Criminal Investigations, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association's Valor Award, the International Narcotics Enforcement Officers Association Medal of Valor, the Kansas City Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association's Valor Award, and the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund Officer of the Month Award. Again, one of the FBI's most decorated FBI agents. And it's certainly been an honor for me to have you here today.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm humbled by that. The bosses at Kansas City put me in for those awards. I knew nothing about it until they actually transpired. It's a good example that a good boss will put his or her people in for awards to show their gratitude. And certainly my bosses in Kansas City went above and beyond putting me in for those awards. They did a great job.
Of course, when you joined the FBI, you had no idea what an adventure you were in for. So why don't we talk about that? Let me ask you my standard question of when and why you joined the FBI.
I was a Marine Corps officer stationed out in Camp Pendleton, California, and Marine Corps peacetime is not a whole lot of fun. I was an infantry officer. I was a company commander, and peacetime's no fun. So I decided that even though I had a regular commission, I had to have an exit strategy here. I applied for the FBI. It didn't happen right away because the hiring wasn't going on very much at the end of the 70s. So I passed everything. I was put in the pool, ready to be hired at some point. I used a GI Bill and went to law school. Got out of law school, passed the bar, reapplied to the Bureau, and they took me right away in 1983. The FBI had always been something that I aspired to be part of and wanted to do. The reputation, how they're held in the public's eye, making a difference. It's not a job, it's a calling and certainly an adventure. Make a difference in the world by doing that. It was kind of the back of my mind. And then I decided to get out of the Marine Corps. It came to the forefront. It certainly was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I wanted to try to duplicate the camaraderie and the esprit de corps that I had in the Marine Corps. To my understanding, the Bureau was one of the few agencies or jobs, so to speak, that would allow me to go from one to the other with a smooth transition with pride and esprit de corps and the adrenaline. I just figured I wouldn't get that adrenaline by practicing law. I wanted the esprit de corps and the friends you go into harm's way with. Those friendships are forever. I had a great ride.
So you spent most of your career working drugs and violent crime.
Yes. I was in a 2-man RA in Mississippi and worked almost all criminal and some background stuff and everything. But mostly it's been Drug Task Force, NYPD, gang task force with the cops and fugitive task force for 8 years till I retired. Honestly, Jerry, I loved every minute. I didn't want to take any annual leave. I didn't want to miss anything. I didn't want to let my friends down on that particular unit. I was a SWAT team leader in New York City and a SWAT team leader in Kansas City, and I wanted to be with my guys wherever we went. I took them to Nairobi, Kenya in 1998 after the embassy bombings in Nairobi, Kenya. We were the team that was in the Olympic Village guarding the Olympic athletes in 2002 in Salt Lake. And then much to my wife's chagrin, in the summer of 2005, before I retired, I went to Afghanistan for 3 months with the FBI. I just had more fun. I can't even tell you the fun and the satisfaction and the wonderful people I have met on the job. They have inspired me, the people I worked with, bosses I've worked for. It's been just a wonderful experience. Looking back on my life, I couldn't have wished for anything better than my FBI experience. And I thank God every day that I ended up there, because it's been such a wonderful calling for me.
How do you take that vast criminal experience and transition to a post-FBI job? What did you do after you left the Bureau?
That's a good question, because the transition is not easy for some people, especially every morning for 8 years before I retired. We'd kick indoors and look for murderers and armed robberies and stuff on the fugitive task force and the SWAT callouts. A lot of people were worried about the transition. I was not, because I had a full career and had some great experiences. I wasn't too worried about it. But what I did was, when I retired, a very dear friend of mine, Hank Schmidt, when he retired, he got a job up at the Marlboro Ranch in Montana. Marlboro Cigarettes owned this 16,000-acre ranch in Montana, and they contracted with a company to provide security out there. It was a great gig. You're out there for 3 weeks at a time. They pay you good money, keep the lid on everything out there, because they give the guests unlimited alcohol and stuff. Out there 3 weeks at a time, home for 6 weeks at a time. It's a beautiful country out there. There's no weapons allowed on the ranch, so you don't have to worry about a shooting situation. I did that for 10 years and helped pay for a lot of cruises and vacations for my wife and myself. I went from, quote unquote, I guess, full throttle to an idle speed, being out at a ranch dressed up as cowboys, keeping the lid on security out there. The transition for me was seamless, because I was working with a lot of my friends from on the job, cops and agents out there. We had 10 of us that had worked together before. Not having to worry about kicking indoors and getting shot at out there was nice. And the pay was great. So I did that for 10 years. And now, since 2016, just been under a strict regimen. We go to mass every day. We work out every day and martinis at night and travel a lot. That's what I've been blessed with, Jerry, post-retirement.
That's the life. I like to give my guests the last word. What would you like to say?
I would like to thank God and the Bureau for giving me the opportunity to serve this wonderful organization and the people that we're sworn to protect. I would like to thank you for being able to bring these stories to life and let the people know and let other agents know, because one of the complaints I had on the job was, Jerry, the Bureau didn't seem to be letting the other agents know what other agents are doing in the field, shooting situations or successful cases or whatever. Hopefully they do a better job of it now, just to pass the word that there's a lot of great things going on with your fellow agents. And sometimes in an individual office, you lose that perspective. And I thank my wife also for being there with me throughout all these crazy situations and being my rock, as well as she's been a very successful agent and supervisor. She was a cop in Kansas City before coming on the job. Probably deserves more accolades than I do. Might just make the news a little bit more, I guess. You can't do this on your own. You need a good partner like I was blessed to have, a wonderful wife to help me go through this journey that we do together and supported me through it. So thank the Bureau and my wife, and thank the good Lord for getting me through this and allowing me to have such a wonderful career. I've just been very grateful.
And that's the end of the interview with Craig Arnold. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes on my website, jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find photos of Craig Arnold and his FBI Honorary medals. There's also links to news articles about the Kansas City fatal shootout, as well as to the FBI surveillance video showing what actually happened in that hotel room in 1997. There's a list that I got from the FBI website of all of the FBI's honorary medals and a paragraph about when and who to those medals are awarded. There's also links to other FBI retired case file review episodes with Ed Morales, Jim Sweeney, Rich Macco, and John Kufta, other FBI Medal of Valor recipients interviewed on this podcast about shooting incidents they were involved in. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist, where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.